Hi guys, Paul Seils here for Conscious Investor Network. Thanks for joining us. We've got Kevin Doodney joining us this evening for this very special webinar. I've known Kevin for about 10 years. So Kevin's one of Australia's leading experts in cutting-edge positive return residential property strategy, shaping the future of housing, and has over 40 years experience in real estate, and is the founder and the chairman of the Future Housing Task Force and the High Yield Property Club. Kevin has been involved in over 20,000 personal transactions and over $2 billion in real estate deals. In the last 12 years, Kevin has helped investors build over 1,000 rooms yielding 8% or better in high demand growth submarkets. I'll ask him a little bit more about what that means. Kevin has been featured in Channel 7, Better Homes and Gardens, Current Affair, ABC Television, 4BC, the Courier Mail, Quest newspapers, etc. Kevin Doodney, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Great to be here, Paul. Beautiful day today, no doubt about it. So I guess get on with the show, and you're driving the slide stack. So I guess that's over to you. So click on.
Okay.
You can flip that one because you've already introduced me. So we won't do that one. Now, guys, one of the important things is a lot of slides here tonight, but we're going to use them purely because if I'm questioned, I like to make sure we've got the proof of where we get our information from. So if I go whizzing past slides, it's only because I will cover that anyway. Basically, this disclaimer is saying don't try what I do at home. We've put a lot of years into this. It's taken us a long time through Smarter, Smaller Homes, 10 or 12 years with the task force trialing different things. And we've now trialed about 200 rooming houses or 1,000 rooms in Brisbane only in the last 10 years. So we pretty well got what we're going to be talking about tonight fairly well covered. So next slide, and we will talk about it from there. So we're going to cover tonight what people are buying, what our members are buying, because we have a membership model, the breakdown of investors, which gives you an idea of the background of why very few people get to where they get, what stops investors from building a portfolio, Australia's immigration policy, because that's fairly new, the rental housing crisis, the new National Building Code and its effect on ongoing costs and changes that we have to deal with. The Sydney and Melbourne are different from Brisbane. So when the media talks about the real estate market, they're always talking Sydney, Melbourne, and we'll talk about why Brisbane is different from that. How much is $1 billion? Because people are throwing that money around like it's confetti, the Olympic journey, and where to from here. So that's what we're going to cover. Basically, what people used to buy was a 4-pack or a 6-pack. They build them back in the 60s. It was a clever thing to do because some of them would live on the top floor, rent out 6 units underneath. I used to call that back in the 60s a mortgage-free home because everyone else paid it off for you. Mostly done by the Greeks and the Italians, whereas the Aussies would buy their principal place of residence, pay it off over 30 years, sell that as their income stream to be able to retire in the lifestyle that they thought they could have. So basically, the Italians and Greeks had worked it out early in the piece, and this is what they would buy. Now, when you buy these things today, though, which are still popular, the problem you've got is because of rates and taxes, once you create titles, such as this case here, the actual return on it is sitting somewhere around about 2.8%. The key points I'd like you to see here is the $70,000 that you're paying for a $2 million price point, and that's what it's sold for at auction. So for $2 million, you're buying $70,000 or $71,000 in income. But after you look at the rates and taxes on 4 units, after you look at the cost of running it, it ends up being somewhere around about 2.5%. Our goal is to show you what you would do today rather than this particular model, how we can show it. But the overlying issue I want you to really remember tonight is that for the first time in history, in 2022, it is now a case where the land is so expensive Australia-wide that the construction of any low-set dwelling house called a principal place of residence is now under capitalisation on that block, particularly if you do that for investment. So whether you build a house for investment or a dual key, it is still an undercapitalisation of the block of land based on how much it's gone up in value. And I think that's the key point we'll talk about tonight as well. Next slide. What you're about to see is a 5-bedroom rooming house, and that particular rooming house is one title on one block of land freehold in a place called Deagon, which is on the north side of Brisbane, close to train stations, buses, shops, all those sort of things. The goal is that we rent this for $330 per room times 5, which gives us about $81,500 in income. And we haven't increased the rent for the last 2 years. So more than likely, probably sitting somewhere around 85. See how you go, Paul. Hey guys, welcome to Deagon. Deagon is a bayside suburb of Brisbane on the north side. Pretty amazing place, but come on in and I'll show you what we're doing. This is one of our new range of homes. This is called a Class 1B rooming house. It's suitable for 5 unrelated parties, so 5 people can live here. And this one hands over in the next couple of days. Now, last Saturday, we were able to introduce this to our HYPC members, and they just loved it to bits. So they made me promise to do a video for all the guys that missed out on that. So we're going to post this on YouTube and a few other things. So interesting, you're hearing a bit of car noise because we're on a major road. We love those because it gives us buses at doors and trains just around the corner and shops and all those things that they really want. So come on in and I'll shut the door and you'll instantly know how quiet it suddenly gets. So where we are here is the common area. A Class 1B must have a common lounge dining kitchen, and it also means one laundry is one dwelling, and we have 2 sets of washing and drying facilities in case one goes on the blink, and you've got 5 unrelated parties, as I mentioned before, living here. So this area, strangely enough, is rarely used in the kitchen areas. This stays the same, and the external property management team organised cleaning for that. So let's have a look at 5 rooms, the first of which is I call it suitable for disabled because it's got wider doorways, it's got a much larger bathroom, and this one also has a sink in the bathroom area as well as outside, whereas the others don't have a bathroom sink. We've had to locate that outside because the particular council here would insist that we can't have a kitchen, but we can have a bathroom sink outside. So, that's a bit weird. It gives us room for bigger showers, of course, which is lovely. And you'll find in all of these rooms, they are quite spacious. So each one is a mini apartment or micro apartment. The locking systems are all digitised, which means should they wish to change the codes, they can. And they're very talkative, but it gives them that extra security. We've also got a separate bedroom area here. In this case, it's open plan because of the need for wheelchair access. Lots and lots of storage, lots of light. Most of all, incredibly quiet. And so that's because the IP in this, the intellectual property, is around solid core doors, noise reduction in ceilings and walls. Even our hallways, which you'll see, those are independently very, very quiet because of the way we use materials to give each person their own personal space. Earlier on, we used to do ducted air conditioning systems, but now we've done individual systems because of the noise transference through the ducting systems can be problematic. So you learn as you go, and we've certainly learned in the last 10 years what that's all about. So let's show you another couple of rooms to give you some idea. So we're back in the common area, and then we've created this hallway. Why do we do that? Because that's extra space? Well, because it gives more privacy. Each one of these walls has got a lot more soundproofing in them, and so it gives them that extra space between the rooms. So we're not connecting walls to walls in terms of our bedrooms. We're now walking past 2 doors here, and then there's another 2 doors in here. So the difference when you move away from a disabled room is now the space changes because you've got this lounge dining kitchen area here with your television. You've got this walk-through hallway where we've got the bathroom sink, and that's important that you see the bathroom sink here, and an unusual bathroom sink at that. We have to have a plug-in hot plate because we're not allowed to put in permanent hot plates. We've got an oven that's freestanding. Let's call that a microwave. Some storage areas, cupboards. When we hand this over, it's fully furnished, right down to knives, forks, spoons, scissors, everything that you can imagine you need is covered. Bigger fridge, you need that. Even though their favourite thing to make for dinner is Uber, it's still important to have that space. Now, difference again, this is totally shuttable. So that means that the bedroom is completely separate. Even though it's only one person, they just feel really comfortable having that opportunity. I'll just push this window over because our photographer's a shy person. And basically you've got 3 spaces there, which is quite a lot of space. And then as we go into our bathroom, you'll obviously notice that what's missing is the bathroom sink. But what that then allows us to do is create a much larger shower, tons and tons of space in there with a toot. And then it means when you're coming out to wash your hands and brush your teeth, obviously your kitchen is very versatile when it comes to that. So I don't think I really need to show you all the rooms. It's just a fundamental difference between the one that's the disabled unit compared to this one, which is the same as the other 4. And we're renting these out currently at around $330 per week, 50 weeks a year to allow for 4% vacancy. Even though that we're running on 0, we still allow for 2 weeks rent on changeover. So that gives us an income of around about $83,000 to $85,000 a year, because we also rent the car parks on site, and we can accommodate around 3 cars on a low set and about 2 cars on our 2-story design because they're smaller blocks. Now, strangely enough, it's actually cheaper for us to build the 2-story than it is the low set. Not in construction cost, but it's the land value. So when you've got a 300 square metre block in say Deagon, you're probably paying around $500,000 for that. But when you get to a larger block like this at 400 square metres, the demand is more around about that 570, 580 mark, whereas the difference in building a 2-story versus a low set is around about, give or take, $50,000. So all in all, it gives you the choice of the 2-story, which has a lot different architecture, and strangely enough, a longer tenancy practice happens in those. Don't ask me why. But generally speaking, it means that our real estate is just designed so that if you're walking past, you wouldn't know it's any different from any home. And so it blends beautifully into the architecture of the given suburb. The other interesting point is that where we're going south side and north side in Brisbane, we're paying $500,000 for a block of land that's near a train, buses, shops, all the infrastructure's in place, but master plan communities way further out are getting $650,000 for the same size block. So we are actually cheaper to be closer to the city with all the infrastructure than we are out there in the new suburbs. So we do not at any time play with master planned estates, or we don't go near them. They're overpriced for us, and we like to have the amenities, walk outside the door, catch the bus, that sort of thing. So guys, that's just a brief overview of what a Class 1B is like when we're ready to hand over. Naturally, there's a few other things to do, add some patios, a few other things, but generally speaking, this house is very close to getting into the rental scene where it will rent for $330 per week times 5 times 50 plus cars, giving you an 8.3 to 8.5% return on your money in residential real estate. And when you resell them, we've noticed that they sell on a 6% yield. So it's kind of got nearly $200,000 in built-in capital growth before we start, at least based on previous sales. Can't predict the future, but I can certainly tell you about what's happened in the past. So that's it for me. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we look forward to catching up with you again real soon. Bye from me.
Okay, so what we've covered so far is that the habits of people in the past would be to buy the old 6-packs and 4-packs, which need a lot of maintenance. Because of the multiple titles, all they're doing is making government rich and you poor. The second problem is if you start building things like a dwelling house on a $500,000 house and land package, assuming you can even get them for that these days, $250,000 of that is tax. So what we're trying to do here is avoid infrastructure charges, as we have. We're trying to avoid all sorts of other hidden taxes, which we do, so that we can try and contain it back so that we can conscientiously make an effort to create a social impact for the customer. And please keep in mind that $330 a week is cheaper than a tent site, a powered tent site, I'll give you that, but it's still a tent site. So if you bother to check the cost of a tent site in an area near you, you'll find they sit somewhere around $330 per week in those inner city locations of Zillmere, Deagon, Boondall, through there, assuming you can even find a caravan park these days. So that's the overview. Most people end up with about one investment property, call it the 80-20 rule. 2 people end up with about 19% of the population. 3 is dropping down to 6, 4 investment properties, 2, and at 5 and plus more, it's 1. Why? Well, because the idea is that the government wants you to buy negative geared property. That way they give you a tax break because they know it's too expensive for the government to create housing for people. So they rely on you to lose money so that they'll give you a weak little tax break and you pray and hope for capital gain. So the whole thing's based on inflation. The more the inflation is out of control, the better it is for government to sell you on that concept, and away we go. It doesn't matter about the downside because the government's making $250,000 on every house
that's a new home. So they're more than happy for you to breed children, send them away at 20, make sure they buy their first home, and away we go. So the model is based on income. It's not about the money. It's about the money. So basically what we have to do is figure out how we can make money for you, but at the same time still provide social impact housing outcomes where you're providing affordable accommodation with no cost for power, water, or sewage cost or any internet cost. So for their money, they get exceptional accommodation of around 30 square meters, a nice little micro apartment. What you get is built-in capital growth because it's a commercial property more than it is residential. And away we go from there. Now, if you want to ask questions tonight, they'll be directed through Paul to me. So happy to help where you may have questions. But in the meantime, let's talk about what stops you from building a portfolio. Next slide. Shows you that the elephant in the room is usually on your back, because what happens is you run out of capital or you run out of serviceability. Why? Well, because you're buying negatively geared property, something that loses money, not makes money. If you buy the money at 4% and it's making 3%, obviously that's tax deductible, but sooner or later you can only have one of those. And when you come back to a bank and say, hi, I've lost a heap of money in the last deal, will you give me another one? Generally speaking, you'd want to be earning a lot of money to get that second deal. So it's really not a good outcome when you look at it that way. Next slide. And basically people get low yields. And so if you just flick through these fairly quickly, you'll see that what happens here is that rather than low yields, what we're looking for is to get more to a return on invested income. So most people give up with no results. A lot of self-doubt and confusion gets in, or worse, you're driven by what the media tells you. They're saying that real estate's falling off the cliff. And you know, that can happen in places like Sydney and Melbourne in some areas. But generally speaking, it's because they've gone too far too quick. And they're just balancing back. And I did say before that Brisbane is different from Melbourne. They invest in the wrong type of property. What do I mean by that? 10% of people, probably let's go 12% of people live within 5K of the city in Brisbane, about 11% in Melbourne, about 10% or 11% in Sydney. So within the top 5K ring of any city in Australia, less than 15% of people live there. So if you buy something in that range of area, you're buying a loser. To answer that question briefly, there's 5 rooms in the house. We are limited by that particular council to say that under the Rooming House Accommodation Act and their act, we can only have 5 unrelated parties living in that room. So basically, you can't eat equity. It's just not something you can chew on. And a screenshot has just covered that for some reason there, Paul. I don't know what's happening there, but we'll slip to the next slide and see if it still stays on. No, it's gone. Next slide. So basically, we're taught about this whole cash flow game, rich dad, poor dad, when we're actually asset rich, but cash poor, which is why in the rich dad, poor dad, they talk about you need to own a couple of laundromats, cash flow. Without cash flow, you cannot survive the game. The game of Monopoly cannot be played today the way it used to be, which was buy it cheap, sit on it for 10 years, get the capital growth, and use that equity to continue to buy. That game of he who dies with the most houses wins is over, because the land cost is so high. And so that's the problem. Next slide. So basically, we're addicted to this whole concept of capital growth, and I call that addicted to quack. Whereas what we need to get addicted to is cash flow, because if we can do that, we're well and truly on a different path, and a much better one for you and for your clients. So if you can get addicted to positive cash flow, that would be a very, very good start. So I'm not asking you to stop being addicted. I'm just asking you to change your addiction to something that will at least allow you to enjoy an income stream outside of job, which stands for just over broke. So I'm saying there is a better way. There's no doubt about that. And I think that better way is to get off the wheel and probably do something a little bit different. So we'll click onto that. And basically, we're saying tonight that if you can get an 8% return on your money rather than 2%, or maybe 3%, if you're really clever, 4%, we can double that. And if you can double that, it means as interest rates rise, and they can do that, at least you've still got some wiggle room before it becomes a little bit too problematic. I see magic in number 8. And the reason I see magic in number 8 is if you just look at it, if you own one home in Australia today, you're automatically a millionaire. So, you know, gee, if you've got some small change in a dish, and maybe you live with some sort of shelter over your head, and you've got clean air and you can read and write, you're already in the top 6% of the world's wealthiest people. But in Australia, That don't work so much because we're really expensive to live here, and we've got the second worst pension in the world, and we've got a government that I'm trying to think of the words. Yeah, no, they're not here to help. So basically, on that, you're on your own. So what I guess I'm saying is we all have a duty of care to be smarter than the people we employ. And regrettably, Australia's forgotten that simple rule, and they employ people to tell them what to do. And unfortunately, they're not real smart. So you do have a duty of care to get smarter. And this is one step in that direction, because if you look at $1 million invested at 4%, then you have to live on 40,000. But if you're going to invest your money at 8%, then you have to live on 80,000. And I don't know about you, but living on 40,000 compared to 80,000, I tend to find 80 a little bit easier than I do 40. And if a lot of people have got $1 million, then at least if you're getting 80K out of that, it's a little bit more comfortable. Next slide. So basically, what do we got? Australia has now decided to open their floodgates. They've said, we don't have the labour forces. We need to unveil our migration, visa and training measures to fill the vacancies across the economy of Australia, holding their first job summit in about 40 years as business has been hit by the acute labour shortage following the lifting of pandemic restrictions. Yeah. And if you believe that, I've got some swampland in Florida for sale, but that's another matter for another webinar. So next slide. 220,000 people are being tipped to leave the southern states of Queensland to the next 5 years, a survey from the Property Council of Australia. They also say they want to move to Queensland's lifestyle, climate and housing affordability. We call this the March of the Millennials. The first time it's happened. Queensland historically has been known as God's waiting room. You came here for the weather. You came here to die. You came here because you were older, and you came here because you just had enough of freezing and looking at seals and penguins in Australia's most livable city. So basically, for the first time in history, we're getting our kiddies back. They're leaving Melbourne. It would appear that Dan Andrews has become what I call the Minister for Tourism and Housing in Queensland in terms of what he has said and done in the last few years. I love Dan. I think he's a great guy. And I think if he stays in power longer, Queensland's going to continue to do very, very well. So, you know, sad for you, but great for us. So looking at that, we've got a lifestyle and housing affordability issue now because 50,000 people, the March of the Millennials, came to Queensland. And what they did for the first time was they enrolled their little kiddies in school. And that's never happened in Queensland before because the oldies coming to Queensland didn't have any kiddies. So all of a sudden, at the rate we've had, we're going to be 400 schools short. That is an infrastructure problem because when you get 50,000 people coming in, they have a tendency to breed a couple of kids and away we go. So in the case of acute problems, that's knocked into the Sunshine Coast as a major problem. It's caused a housing crisis, a shortage in schools, a shortage in a number of areas. Probably going to take them about 10 years to catch up to that. Why? Because everyone wants to make a buck. And if I want to create affordable housing in the Sunshine Coast, they'll charge me $20,000 per room in infrastructure charges. And in Brisbane, I pay zero. So I can pay the council $100,000 to solve affordability in Sunshine Coast. I pay Moreton $100,000, Gold Coast about the same. And Logan, I'd probably have to pay about 45 grand. So Brisbane is the only place that I can really build these affordable homes in. So I can't help Sunshine Coast. They can live in tents. It's their own fault. And that's all there is to it. Next slide. So no option but a tent. Charities say supply shortages are so severe that they're resorting to handing out tents to families unable to buy a home. So if I then said to Queensland, okay, guys, Future Housing Task Force, we can fix your problem. Here's what we can do. They'd say, well, we can't afford to do that because we still want our infrastructure charges. We still want to make our 250 grand per house because we need that money. And so fundamentally, it's a bit of a lose-lose. And when you've got all these people coming in that talk about this, they themselves tend to be what I call more lobbyists, where they need more money from government to be able to then pursue this problem. In other words, please, sir, can I have some more? And that don't work. So you're going to see a lot more tents by Christmas and even a lot more tents by March. So it's going to be quite a pandemic, not as big as the last one, but this one will certainly show in the southern tent cities that you'll start to see kick in. Next slide. So basically, shelters seeking their services are staying for months amid the rental shortage. And it's going to get worse and worse. Next slide. is just a summit. Yeah, that's what they do. Let's call a housing summit. So this was pumped in before they called on Anastasia Palaszczuk to create a need for her to have a discussion about this problem with affordability. Now, affordability is based on getting enough rental stock. So Anastasia Palaszczuk just announced that she's now going to charge land tax amalgamated across all your properties across Australia to means in English that if you own 3 properties in New South Wales and 2 in Victoria, she'll add all those up. And when you buy 1 property in Queensland, she'll charge a land tax across the whole 5. So she figured out that that's not a problem to her because she's not going to lose votes because you're from interstate. What she hasn't figured out is the massive blowback for the people who don't have the intelligence to think about it because they've gone and bought their houses in their own name rather than structures which aren't really structured through to the land tax issue. This is where you throw back to a guy like Paul, who understands the concepts of structure and systems and processes. And again, you have a duty of care to be smarter than most people. So I guess I'm saying that whilst I didn't mean to play into Paul's hands, it does clearly highlight that you need to use your brains and think about what you do so that when someone thinks they're being smart, you're smarter. Okay? Next slide. The next 5 years, the Property Council survey finds that we have to educate the community about good growth, incentivise the creation of more housing designed for renters. Good luck with that. Empower the resources of economic development, Queensland, the state government's growth areas to identify opportunities. Yep. And reform planning processes to reduce red tape. You know, we're going to come back in 5 years' time and I'm going to check in on that with Paul. And I reckon someone's going to come up and say, we need 5 key points. We're going to have to educate the community about benefits of growth. These things just keep repeating because no one really wants to do anything about it because there's no money in it. The money is in the mortgages, the inflation, and all those other areas. Solving this problem is not going to be a government one. Next slide. So basically the challenge is we have left the market and there's lots of home buyers, which is fabulous on one hand, and the Deputy Premier is saying things because Anastasia Palaszczuk didn't want to say anything at that time. Here, you do this. So basically some councils, they're beating up the councils now to say it's their fault for not bringing on the land sooner. And yes, it used to take us 9 months to do a subdivision that now takes 12 years. We can breed a baby and send them to high school before we can do a master planned estate. So that's how long it's taking. And the amount of money it costs adds to that $250,000 per house in the addition of state, federal and council charges. Next slide. Let's have a look at this one.
With Queensland's housing crisis reaching new heights, there's a desperate call for the government to act.
Industry experts want a summit convened in a bid to find solutions to problems that have thousands of families with no place to call home.
For Q and Young, inspections and rejections sadly go hand in hand.
There's only so many times you can hear you are denied before you start to take it personally.
His family has been searching from Caboolture to Coomera. They're currently living in a motel. The car could be next.
If that's what it takes, but you know, you don't want to raise a kid out of the back of a car.
Victims of the tightest rental market in history. Industry groups say it's evidence of the need for mass sector reform. They're demanding a housing summit to kick it off.
For government, for industry and community experts to come together and table new and innovative issues to tackle this housing challenge.
A challenge faced by AAC, homeless in crisis care.
You feel take your time, take your time.
Very easy for vulnerable people to slip through the cracks.
Today I'm calling on the Premier to chair that housing summit. And if she won't, well, then I will.
The government points to record housing funding.
Well, let's move on from that because I just want to highlight how a press clip works. It works on the fact that, first of all, they need to show you the problem and how the problem's so big that no one can solve it. Then we figure out who blames who. We then have to get people on there that are very upset and that their life's over. They've got to live in a car and a few other things, cut to that. And then they talk about background, usually bring in an expert to talk about what you need. And the end of it is usually a lobbyist hitting government up for some more money so that they can get some tax breaks for their company. So that's basically it. That's the game they've played for about 40 years, same old, same old. So it's good that they haven't changed the model. And I haven't watched television for 10 years, so it's probably the first clip I've seen for a while, but hadn't changed. Same old, same old. Next slide. God, I'm cynical. It's a sad thing, that. Number of homes for rent combined capital cities. What it's saying is we haven't got any for rent. Okay, we're running at 1%, 0%. Next slide. Same thing. We're in trouble. This is an interesting one. What we did here was show that Queensland's 5th largest town is the town of nowhere. What we're saying here is today they've added up all of the people on the social housing register with vacancy rates across the state are at historic lows, and low-income households are spending more than 50% of their income on housing costs. This excites me because this slide was only done in the last couple of days. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to see that back in 2019, if you just have a look at Queensland, the affordable housing shortfall was 54,700. The town of nowhere today, 19, 20, 23, 3 or 4 years later, is right on cue with the number they predicted back in 2019. So this data went to every government agency, every council as a crisis problem that if we didn't address quickly, we already had a problem. Now, that's going to stretch out to 254,000 by 2036. And that doesn't even take into account the addition of 200,000 people from overseas, interstate migration, and the fact that when you bring in people from overseas, they're not coming in and buying a Tesla. They're coming in here and buying a second-hand Hyundai or maybe a PT, something that doesn't even exist anymore. So, it's a bit scary, really. So those numbers will go up exponentially as we open our borders to the immigration, because we're promising jobs that people in Australia don't seem to want according to the reality. But it's not really that. What it's really about is that on the mountain where I live, population 7,000 people, Mount Tamborine behind the Gold Coast, we have to shut down 16 restaurants because they can't get chefs, because the chefs can't get accommodation. And when they do, they can't afford the rent up here because it's a bit highbrow. And so fundamentally, don't want to work here. They'll work down the coast where they can afford it. So all of a sudden, the impact is then on those people. Now, again, you have a duty of care to be smarter than someone else. So when this happened back in 1840 in Paris, the government said, if you build any home in Paris, you have to build a unit on top for your chambermaid or cook, and it has to be no smaller than 9 square metres. So every home built in Paris from 1840 to 1890 had its own 9 square metre apartment. But as your opposition down the road wanted your chambermaid and cook, they then built a 10 square apartment, 15 square apartment, and it ended up being 19 square metres just to tempt that cook and that person to then leave the 9 square metres and come to the other family round the corner down the road, because what was in need in 1840 to 1900 in Paris was workers. Because everyone had money, but they didn't want to cook for themselves, clean for themselves and other things. So nothing new. It's just that we haven't figured out how to share accommodation within our principal place of residence in Australia for our profit, but also our benefit. Just saying, something old could be new again. So basically, the Pulse is devoted to a never-ending pursuit of policy enlightenment. Ross is a great guy, Ross Elliott. Let's have a look at what he had to say here. It's just some notes that we can skip through. And I'm only giving this as background as to why and what we're doing here. So after laying idle for 10 years, the National Building Code, that's the Australian National Building Code. That means that most of the houses built in Queensland are from Melbourne, and they all meet the National Building Code. Metricon, Henley, Jennings, all those guys. So finally, a lick of paint after 10 years. And what they're saying is next year we need 7-star energy efficient homes, which means we now have to build a home that is accessible, which means that you can build a new home from next year with wider doors, wider hallways, wider rooms, so that if you're in a wheelchair, you don't have to leave your home. No problem. It's all built in. 7-star rating, that's what you have to do. That's going to add more cost into the inflationary process of housing. Even though it's a great idea, it does reduce the carbon footprint, but fundamentally it is a cost impost passed on to the end user, and then they'll complain that that's passed on to the tenant with continuing rental increases. Next slide. So basically that transition period is through to October 2023. That's about 12 months from now before accessible housing comes into effect. It comes off the back of 100 organisations beefing up from that, who are mostly people who just probably have got nothing better to do. But we're stuck with it. It's there. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a cost thing. I'm saying everyone wants to save the whale until they're hungry, is what I'm saying. And when the market gets weird, the whales start to disappear. So, it's just what it is. And so you've got to be careful of these things where you just add cost on cost on cost and then complain about inflationary measures or the cost of rentals going up to a critical number where people are then not able to live there. So it's a big problem as they keep adding these new codes. They're saying cooling bills. We're going to save $500. It's going to cost us $5,000 to do it, but we're going to save $500. Next slide. Property Council believes that these things will link it, but because the councils are going to have their own regulatory impact statements, they're scared that each state government's going to run it their own way, which means even though it's a national code, everyone's going to figure out how to make a buck out of it because they're going to add a new body to watch this and measure it and manage it and all these other things. So a lot of jobs are going to be created from this particular model of change in less than about 52 weeks. Next slide. And the next one, we'll skip that. And we'll probably skip that and skip that because it's all related to that. Now, this is the big one. What makes Brisbane different from the rest of Australia? Melbourne has 453 people living within 1 square kilometre. Now, I went down there on Friday to meet some clients of mine who wanted to go to football. The Lions were playing and they were doing well until the first bounce. After that, they just forgot how the game was played. But I was there anyway, and we got some work done after that and spent a few days. I don't like Melbourne. It seems to be cold. We went out fishing. There was a seal there. That was a clue. And so it's not a hospitable place, yet 453 people live there per square kilometre, the densest population in Australia. And I mean that in terms of density, not dense. So the next one is Adelaide, because it's a smaller town at 404 per square kilometre. Sydney, 400. Perth, 317. But let's jump to Brisbane. We are a country town, 145 people per square kilometre. And we complain here about traffic jams and other things. My God, we are just not anywhere near it. By world standards, we aren't even a country town. We are just a backwater. At 145 per square kilometre, it's nothing. I mean, Hobart is close to that. Darwin, well, that's understandable. But, for the rest of us, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne. So what I'm saying is when you're talking about property, auction clearances, crashing markets, yes, in densities of 453 per square kilometre, we're getting a bit New Yorkish. But in Brisbane, we're not. It's different. And so we're going to have a jump like we haven't seen, and we need to see why that underwriting factor is going to kick, because we're not going to stand for 145 people per square kilometre over the next 10 years. We're going to jump from that country town status into something a little more powerful, because out of our competitive bidding to win the Olympic Games, oh, that's right, we were the only one who went for it, but we won it anyway. There was no other person going for it, so we won it. It's probably the first time we've won anything, but what the hell, we got it. Go Aussies. That's important you remember that. We are a country town in Brisbane, and that will change. How long will it take to spend $1 billion? Because at a rate of $1,000 a day, 2,740 years later, you've spent it. 5,000 a day, 500 years, and $100,000 per day, 25 years. Let's relook at that. If you blow $100,000 a day for 7 days a week for 25 years, you've spent $1 billion. We are blowing over $30 billion in the next 10 years on the Olympics. $30 billion. Do I need to explain that again? That's $30 billion, okay? That's a lot of money. So just so long as you understand $1 billion, because it's getting a bit sensitive. People don't understand $1 billion these days. So let's click to the next slide and see where some of that is going to be spent. And then we'll zoom in on a couple of those things to give you an idea of what's really happening. Next slide. That one should play when you click it.
The Brisbane 2032 Master Plan includes 32 venues within southeast Queensland for the 28 Olympic sports, located in 3 primary zones, connected by high-quality road and rail transport networks. The Brisbane zone is the location for 22 venues. The spectacular Brisbane River Cluster includes 4 venues and will also be home to the International Broadcast Centre and Main Press Centre. The Brisbane Cricket Ground will host the athletics competition and the Olympic and Paralympic opening and closing ceremonies. The Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre will host 4 Olympic sports and 5 Paralympic sports. Located in the adjacent riverfront parkland is the South Bank Piazza and the Cultural Forecourt. The Brisbane City Cluster will accommodate 2 key venues, the new inner city Brisbane Arena and the Brisbane Football Stadium. The Hurston Cluster includes the Brisbane Showgrounds, the beautiful Victoria Park, Ballymore Stadium and the Brisbane Indoor Sports Centre. The Chandler Cluster includes 4 venues, the Anamiers Velodrome, the Brisbane Aquatic Centre, the Brisbane International Shooting Centre and the Chandler Indoor Sports Centre. The Brisbane Olympic and Paralympic Village will be located in the 300-hectare North Shore Hamilton Priority Development Area. Adjacent to the Brisbane Olympic and Paralympic Village is the Royal Queensland Golf Club. 2 venues are located in the north of the city, the Brisbane Entertainment Centre and the planned Moreton Bay Indoor Sports Centre. Situated in the east of Brisbane are 2 venues, the Manly Boat Harbour and the planned Redland Whitewater Centre. 3 existing venues are situated in Brisbane's south and southwest, the Queensland Tennis Centre, Lake Wyalong in the beautiful scenic Rim and the newly constructed Ipswich Stadium. The Gold Coast Zone comprises 6 venues. 2 venues make up the Broadbeach Cluster, the Gold Coast Exhibition and Convention Centre and the Broadbeach Park Stadium. The Gold Coast Sports and Leisure Centre is located within 7 kilometres of Broadbeach and will host 3 Olympic and Paralympic sports. Located in Southport is the Broadwater Parklands. And located in the north of Gold Coast City is the Coomera Indoor Sports Centre. The Gold Coast Olympic and Paralympic Village is located within a planned residential development in Robina. It will be home to over 2,600 athletes and team officials. 2 minutes from the village is the Gold Coast Stadium. The Sunshine Coast Zone will host 4 venues. The Kawana Precinct includes the Sunshine Coast Stadium and the Sunshine Coast Indoor Sports Centre. The Alexandra Headland venue will accommodate road events and kiteboarding competition. The Sunshine Coast Mountain Bike Centre will host Olympic mountain bike competition. The Sunshine Coast Athletes Satellite Village is located in the heart of the new Maroochydore City Centre in the Sunshine Coast. Regional football will be hosted in Townsville, Toowoomba and Cairns. Australia's 2 previous Olympic hosts, Sydney and Melbourne, will also host football prelims and quarterfinals, enabling Australia-wide engagement. The Brisbane 2032 Master Plan will showcase the diverse and spectacular region of southeast Queensland, its cities, beaches and hinterland. The Games will leave a legacy of new and upgraded facilities and a better connected, more sustainable region.
Yeah. So basically, if we look at Expo 88, that was the time where Queensland was a place where elephants used to go to die back in 88. So when you look at the impact of something like the Expo, the impact of an Olympics is way, way bigger than that. And when people start to see that we are not really a city of Brisbane, but we are just a road to the Gold Coast and a road to the Sunshine Coast, they're going to really start to clue on that we've got a lot of stuff there that's worth talking about. Smart call by using existing infrastructure to a degree to host the Olympics across a wider band than they would normally do, but it's still $15 billion that's going to cost the state government to do that. So let's just have a quick deep dive at some of the other issues. Next slide. The big one coming up in infrastructure, next one, would be the Cross River Rail, I imagine. No, it's a series of major projects propelling Brisbane. These are private things where you've got Cbus doing their Big 3 Tower project, which, you know, is all part of the cost outside of government. This is how you get to 30 billion, because you've got the government chucking in half and then all of a sudden the private sector kicking in with other infrastructure. Next slide would be the new Albert Street Station. Brisbane, for the last 60, 70, 80 years, has Central Station and Roma Street, but no connection to the south side. Albert Street is smack bang in the middle of our city. So for the first time, you'll spit out right where the mall is. And that's a really big thing. That's $5.4 billion just there. 5.4 billion. That's a big number. Waterfront Brisbane, massive upgrade of our River City precinct. You know, I don't know why. They're not real smart. The last time they upgraded it, it all washed away in the last flood. And then they had another flood and all washed away again. So maybe the engineers might figure out this time how they can stop rushing it out to Moreton Bay and, annoying the tortoises and the dolphins with our various piers and things. So I hope they get it right this time around. I hope. Queen's Wharf is a big one. Multiplex wish they hadn't won it. Construction costs went up 57%. 2 years after they won it, it's now gone up another 16%. I would suggest that they will build this for a loss, and I pity any subcontractors involved in that because it could be problematic as it keeps going forward. It is massive. We've got Packers money there and a whole bunch of other people. It's the first time Brisbane's going from the Treasury Casino to something really, really big. And I was in the Crown Casino in Melbourne. This thing leaves it in the dust. So it is big and lots and lots of things there. The Wollongabba precinct, the Gabba. As you can see, close to the city, the rail link, the Cross River rail link spits out there because that is the opening of the Olympics there and the closing ceremonies. And we're talking 10 years from now. But our $5.4 billion is being spent at high speed right now, and this will be finished well before then. And we've just finished Tunnel Newman, where we've got probably 10 or 15 Ks worth of tunnels under the city. A lot of stuff's already happened, gearing up for that. Next slide. We've got the Gabba just in a bigger picture. A lot of stuff happening there. Next slide is the Exhibition, Roma, Albert, Cross River Rail, Wollongabba and Bogger Road, but they're also spending about $1 billion in Pimpama, Gold Coast Link, because they have to be able to get people from the Gold Coast to the Sunshine Coast in 10 years' time into those locations because they've spread the Olympics across all of those areas. So they've created a real problem there that they have to deal with today because it ain't going to be worth doing when you've only got 2 years to run. These things cost a lot of money and time to do. Next slide. Shows the Brisbane Metro. This is a $1.2 to $2 billion expense by Brisbane City Council, the largest council in the Southern Hemisphere, in charge of their own transportation networks. And they're launching the Brisbane Metro, which is their version of the Melbourne trams. And that's to deal with the ongoing growth of Brisbane. And it's committed and they're off and running, separate to the Olympics, but part of that infrastructure. Next slide. Is the Victoria Park. That's massive. That's one of our huge golf courses gone. That's going to be a massive precinct for entertainment and just outcomes, entertainment, a whole bunch of stuff. Next slide. Is the Waterfront Brisbane I mentioned before. More and more money's going into there and others are following. At the moment, what we're doing is tearing down the old infrastructure. Next slide. The Kangaroo Point Pedestrian Bridge is one of two. That is a big project, and it's just linking the south side to the north side. At the moment, Brisbane's cultural centre is on the south, Brisbane City on the centre, but at the moment, everything's moving back to Queen's Wharf and other areas. Next slide. Brings us into the International Cruise Terminal. Car parks are now built. It's off and running. They tried one further into town, but when you look at the new cruise liners, they're about 6 times bigger than the Titanic. And it's a bit tricky getting them up all the way through under those bridges. And it's just not worth dropping them off at Hamilton when they can drop them off at the start of the river here and then bus them quickly to the centre. It's a much better way of going about it. So, yeah, big commitment. West Village, West End, lots and lots of money there, probably a couple of billion going into West End. That's next to the Gabba. And so that whole sector is going through massive growth. Again, this is not me saying you should buy there. Anything within 5K of the city of Brisbane is a loser. So as long as you remember that, that's great. So just because I'm telling you this is where it's at doesn't mean to say that's where your money should go. Next slide. Is Redcliffe Peninsula. 50,000 people live there. Nice place, but we can't do anything there in terms of affordable housing. Not our cup of tea. It's just they pointed out as a place that's going through gentrification, which it is. And why not? Nice Bayside area, good place to live. We're back on this magic number 8 just to remind you that 8% gives you 80,000 for every million. We've now got people building up to 10 rooming houses, which gives them $1 million in income. They feel passively $1 million in income is good, but secondly, they're helping a social outcome for people. They're giving rooms that are cheaper than a tent site. It makes them feel good at the barbecue. And more importantly, it gives them more safety net when they've got 5 tenants rather than 1 in one building. Because when things go bad, rents become easy to find when you're all competing for the same buyer with a 4-bedroom home. When you're competing against a tent site, there's not much movement from there. So, it's a little bit more stable, if you like. Next slide. shows you that 8% just simply accelerates time. It doubles it. You get there in half the time because you're using your money wisely. Developers make more money than us because they have a 25% return on invested funds, and that's what it's all about. Superannuation companies won't play much under 10, and so it makes it hard for them at the moment because they can't find anything over 10, and so it's a bit problematic. And the self-managed super funds are the second largest super fund in Australia with 1.1 million members, and they have an average of about $650,000. So ideally, we are now hitting the self-managed super funds for our product being the rooming house market. So now we'll get into that. So let's have a look at that particular product as we just accelerate through here, because it started as a study into our smarter, smaller spaces, which we kicked off in 29. It morphed into rooming houses where 5 tenants to 55 tenants coexisted on one block of land, such as the next generation boarding houses in New South Wales, and numbers would vary state to state. In English, you could do a 9-bedroom rooming house in Melbourne today. You could do 55 rooms in New South Wales. You could do about 8 in in Western Australia. Not sure about South Australia. Let's call it 5 or 6. Hobart, probably 5 or 6, and Queensland 5. So, and Brisbane is the only location where you're not paying $100,000 in infrastructure charges. So again, Brisbane. Next slide. So that's just the background. We had a problem. We created the Smarter Smaller Home, which was 120 square metres. It rented for exactly the same money as a home double its size. Our next challenge was to create a home half that size again. Next slide, if we could. And therefore, the next one was a 65 square metre home that was 21 square metres on one side and 34 square metres on the other. Now, collectively, that rent equaled the same as a 4-bedroom home. So what we learned there was that size doesn't matter, but in terms of the fact that the law of diminishing return is very clear, you make more money with smaller space because you're dealing with a larger audience. It's as simple as that. More people have a need. In English, 20% of Australians make it financially and 80% of people do not. So therefore, you're playing to a bigger market, 80% of them, rather than 20% of them. This unit on the right, if you just look at it, it has a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and a meals area, and that was 34 square metres. Our average size rooming house per room, 5 of these under one roof, is this model, this size, more or less. This one was 21 square metres. We found that too small. It was just not nice. It wasn't comfortable. So we went with this and created 5 of these under one roof. Why? Because every time I built this damn thing, I got hit with $21,000 in infrastructure charges, council approvals, and it reduced my return to about 2.8%. So whilst it solved affordable housing, the government ripped me a new one in terms of tax and costs. That's why we invented 5 of those under one roof, one set of rates, one set of bin collection, et cetera, et cetera. So this was the beginning of it in 2009, just giving you the background. Next slide. That's the plan of the 5-bedroom home. So now what you're seeing is 5 of those units of accommodation that are under one roof, plus a common area, because legally we have to have a common area, lounge, dining, kitchen, and laundry. And legally we can only have one laundry. One laundry is one dwelling. So it's about how we interpret the town plans, which is my favourite thing to do, not. And so basically that's where we are. It works. We don't need council approval to do it. It annoys the hell out of them. They've taken us to court on now 2 or 3 occasions, and each time we win, sooner or later they'll ban us, and then they'll come back and say we can do it as long as we give them $100,000. Just saying. First they ignore you, then they fight you, then they tax you. So at the moment, we're on a roll, but I don't know how long that's going to be for before they get me. But at the moment, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Next slide. What is it all about? A rooming house costs about $100,000 more to build than a normal residential home. So I mentioned before that building a residential home is an undercapitalisation. Let's look at it. If you're paying $400,000 for a block of land, then the building cost is $400,000 to build it. And the furniture is nothing because you're not going to do that. Your stamp duty is $12,000 and legal fees are $1,000. Building a rooming house, the land content is $400. The cost to build it is $500, $100,000 more. Furniture is another $24, at the moment $26. Stamp duty is $12,000 and legal fees are $1,000. So you can see there's about $100,000 there and some furniture thrown in to create a rooming house, but the difference is 67,000 net versus 19,000 net. So if you're creating an investment home using a 4-bedroom model and you're pulling in 3.2% versus 9.15%, then I'm just saying that your money's at least working properly. And this one has, as you can see here, 5 tenants versus 1 tenant that's paying you an average of 26 grand a year. And we're only charging $330 a week, which is 15 grand a year times 5. So what's our vacancy? 0. Who's our demographic? 36 to 42-year-old women who work for the council, state government. They're teachers, they're nurses, they're doctors, they're ministers of religion. They are factory workers, average age 42 to 45 male. That changes in the Bayside suburbs where they suddenly become 60 because they want to live by the seaside. So basically it changes when you get to the Bayside areas like Brighton, Wynnum and Manly, but basically the rents are the same. We then had SIL providers, supported independent living, wanting to take every house that we could create and take longer term leases because they cannot find accommodation for $330 a week with power paid, internet paid, and all insurances paid and everything else. So they'd take a 5-year lease if we'd give it to them. We don't do it very often because it limits our ability to stay in the open market, which is our idea to stay there because our demographics are what we looked for. Now, when we did go to SIL providers, and we have, the problem we discovered is we create 13.5 kilowatts of power, which means we negate the power bill by about down to $200 per quarter. But when we went to SIL providers, every tenant was living there 24/7, which blew the costs out on cost of running because they don't move. They need supported independent living. They don't go anywhere. So we created a real problem there. So we now have to look at 3-phase power for our SIL providing outcomes where we can then produce more solar off the roof. And I would point out, by the way, that we're doing very well with solar. The storage of the solar is a problem in batteries because the current run is the amount of batteries we have in the world will keep us going for 10 minutes in the world status at the moment with batteries. So I don't think we're quite there yet, given that the power we store in batteries right now is good for 10 minutes. I think we need a bit longer than that. So might need to go back to the drawing board, think about that, dig up some more coal, keep the old Teslas going that way. It's going to be a while before we actually scratch our head and look at it from a blank page. But in terms of this one, it's a winner because you can see here, 19 grand, 67 grand. You choose death or life, your call, because you can't make good decisions if you haven't got the cash flow to back you. Next slide. 8% makes a difference. Yes, it does. 16 makes an even bigger difference, but that's harder to do. Next slide. Is we revisit this because what's our market size? If we go with social housing, and we don't, our demographic is 36 to 42 work for the councils and governments. If we even started to go near this number, the government would rent our buildings office with a 2-year rental guarantee with a make good clause at the end of 2 years. And we would rent and sell a whole lot of them to them if we wanted to, because that's the waiting lists across the board for that, which is 254,000 ongoing and climbing quickly as they open the borders. Next slide. Queensland and beyond. Let's have a look at what a rooming house looks like. And we'll just do a quick snapshot of these for you. Hendra, 83 grand per annum. These are 3 years ago. So we haven't put our rent up for probably 3 years. So while everyone else has put their rent up to 20 and 30% increases, we're still quoting $330 per week. Now, yes, some people are getting $400, but I'd sooner under-promise and over-deliver than over-promise and under-deliver. And secondly, we do create a social housing impact, and I'd like to keep it that way. But so, if we start getting the biggest rent we possibly can and compete with that one, sooner or later we'll move from 0 vacancy back to 4%. So if you just stack it at 8.5% for now, it will get you to 10 and double digits in a short time, but be patient at $5 a time when you start pursuing these. Next ones are in Annerley, 83 grand. Morningside, there's 2 there, 2 buildings, 2 titles. That's 10 rooms. That's about 170 grand at the moment. That's gone up to about 90,000 at the moment. So they're about 180 grand now and heading to 200 because Morningside's so close to the city. Next slide is Wynnum. Wynnum is now running higher than that, probably close to about 90. And Acacia Ridge, that's a renovated one. We don't like to renovate them. It's not good. Doesn't work too well. Next slide is showing us the fact that how much do you need to invest? Well, depends who you go to as your valuer, depends who you go to as your broker. So a minimum of 80,000 to a maximum of 200,000. A lot of these are seen on a commercial loan. We have specialist lenders who get us back into resi product. If you get caught in a commercial loan, you'll need 20% income on $1 million buy. That's 200 grand. And if you go on a resi loan, then you need less. But a lot of people build them and revalue them at the end of a year, and then they pull the equity out of that with a new valuation because they tend to value on a 6% yield rather than an 8% yield. So you tend to pick up 200 grand or have done in the past. So our capital growth is manufactured rather than reliant on the market having a force of capital growth because people are happy to buy them at 6%. So what do we do in terms of our membership model? We source the land. We find it. I looked at 30 blocks this week so far. Of those, we've got 5 that work. We've got 41 slabs pouring at the moment. We are geared to do 100 this year, and our building teams are geared to 100 this year. No more, no less. That's what their staff have. That's what they can get to. We're 60 short, and we have 9 months to fulfill that number. I'm confident of hitting that number. So we source the land. We design the house on that block. Our builder that we've engaged builds 100 for us, so he gives us a discount on the bulk number. So we've got him down to a margin that's quite exciting. We do the project management of the whole thing from the acquisition of your land through to the handover to the specialist property manager. We take it all the way through to completion and then assist you in sourcing the tenants before I step out of the picture. So basically, we assume you're living in Switzerland and you don't have the time to find the land, build the house or rent it. So that's my job. The pros and cons. Well, the pros of buying a rooming house is cash flow. You're buying it on a residential block. It's freehold. The pros are you've got 5 tenants versus 1. The cons are the banks hate you. They don't like it because you're actually showing some intelligence, and they don't like that because they don't understand rooming houses. So generally, you're going to need lenders outside of the big 4, such as Macquarie and others, Pepper Money, all sorts of people, Virgin Money, or people from Europe who love them to bits under the HOMO scheme, homes of multiple occupancy. Thought that out well, didn't they? So basically, that's the brand. That's what they do. And yes, it is a worldwide trend, but in Australia, it's new to the block. Been around for hundreds of years in England, Paris, as I mentioned before, 1840. Next slide. Shows us the rental returns of what we look at. Next slide is all about just the positioning, the fact that we give them, what's their biggest complaint? Slow internet. Tonight, Paul's running the thing. Our videos were buffering, slow internet at his end. NBN needs an upgrade for Paul. Maybe he's using, I don't know, some clever technology guarded that DARPA aren't yet aware of. I don't know, but needs some tweaking there. So basically, insurance is different. It's about $2,500, but insurance is about 3 insurers across Australia. Next slide shows you the capital growth is manufactured in this area because 6% buys them rather than the other amount. Next slide shows us that I can't see that, but it's a house. I don't know what it says up there. So we'll skip to the next one. Our demographics, I know that one. So our demographics, as I've said, is workers, nurses, doctors, teachers, factory workers, your daughters, your sons, or you. Basically, and that's who we want. We're not interested in the others, and it's just silly to even go there because that's the market. The millennial market is bigger than the boomer market by a long way. So they have as much a problem where 80% of them don't make it, 20% do. Next slide. So site selection is the big one. I looked for land that's near or on a railway station, bus stations, shops, factories, good employment. Zilmere has the airport close to the Sunshine Coast, the tunnel systems. It's affected by the Olympics, a whole bunch of stuff that we look for there. Next slide shows us the site acquisition. That's a doozy because in site acquisition, we're talking about other easements, sewage in the wrong place, a whole bunch of stuff. We go through probably 30 or 40 checklists before we come back to you and say, this one's cool, we're happy to go ahead with it. So yeah, it's a huge job. Building design varies from block to block, but generally it's a low set or 2-story, low set on 400 square meters or bigger, below 400 square meter block, 2-story. Next slide is the building process. Next slide. They're just pretty slides. We do the deal basically from start to finish. We remind you again, you're going to spend 100 grand plus furniture to create a rooming house, but you're going to get 5 tenants and a lot more money in return for that, and more stability, 0 vacancy, stay that way for quite some time to come. Next slide is putting it all together. We source the land. As I said before, we understand the needs and goals in that strategy session, and we source the land in location with you. We figure out what you're looking for. We go out and find it, and then we create the outcome. We design it to the highest and most profitable use. We find our builder. We then project manage the thing. Would I project manage it? Yeah. But I can't call it project management. That requires a university degree. They kicked me out of school too early for that. So we call it something else. Design management, I think. Handover, I look after that from start to finish. We source the tenants with our specialist property managers, and that's the process that we go through. Next slide. Covers us for solving the land acquisition crisis. What do I mean by that? Well, if we click through this slide, it probably does something I don't know. Yes, it does. Developers, they do master plan estates. Their job is to figure out how do they make 30% on their money. I call it the Irish developer, a turd. If they don't make a turd on their money, they won't do a development, which means there's no profit left in it for you. The only thing they'll let you build on that is a 4-bedroom home with a covenant. If I go in and ask to build a rooming house, it would be in breach of their covenant, can't do it. Small investors, well, they play with the dual key properties or low set houses, the Metricons, things of that nature. And the last one, of course, is little old us. Getting ready for the market for rooming houses is the big one. You need to know that you're finance ready, because when we find a block of land in Zilmere and Banyo and Nunda, if you haven't bought it in the first 6 minutes, it's gone. Market slowed a little. It's taking a day to 4 days now, but it's still that quick. So it's a 2-step process: land first, building contract second, and away we go. Understanding the numbers, we covered those before. 330 per room annualized gives us 85,800 at that level. At Brisbane City Council rates, we've got electricity, water, fire compliance, internet, insurance, cleaning and garden. Agency management fees are not 7% on a rooming house, so 8.5, but we do not charge a full week's rent to relet. We charge half a relet fee, so it is reduced that way. In Melbourne, it's 25% management fee, not 8.5%. So be mindful of that. We're talking Brisbane, not New South Wales, and not Victoria. So that does vary council to council. What locations? Clearly Brisbane, for everything I just showed you tonight, from the Olympics to all the other stuff. It really is exciting to have tunnels and cross-river rails for people that are only running at 145 per square kilometre, whereas we're catching Melbourne and Sydney's infrastructure and beating it and leaving it behind with a country town. So it's going to be quite the elastic catch-up. What do we do when we're assessing things? The location, the flooding. We don't like floods. We call that the Noah principle, or loosely put, scattered showers my ass, because we're going to see a lot more of that coming ahead. So we don't want to be anywhere near flooding. Sloping, we don't like it. Total square metres of land. The developable land on that block. Off-street parking is important. Upsets the neighbours when you take all their parking. Zoning, easements, encumbrances, builders' covenants, and more. Next slide. We're covering deal alert. What do we send out to our members? What do you get? How do we communicate? Well, what we show you is the next slide, which is how we put a deal alert out, which is we write this little screed that says, this one's in Wynnum, 9.7%. We're nice. We say good afternoon or good morning, and we have easy access to the gateway. It shows you the detail, $1,600 a week. That's the assessment. That's what you're buying it on. And we go to the next slide where we show you what it was we positioned on the block, which in this case is a low set studio design, 210 square metre home. Next slide shows us the building package. And the next one is just showing us what people are buying, what our members are buying, the breakdown of what we've covered tonight. And I think we've covered that, most of that, if not all of that. So where to from here? We wrote a guide, 72 pages, how to successfully invest in rooming houses. It's taken a year or two to write it. It's constantly in change, which is why it's digital. And we send that out to our members. And we've got an educational website. We have webinars every month, 10 a year. We have boot camps where you're there for 3 days. We do drive yourself tours to look at the rooming houses, co-housing, new products that we're dealing with from NDIS and other things. And it's a 2-year membership. Next slide. Covers us in nothing in particular that we haven't covered, just revisiting the income. Where to from here? And this is the pitch, for want of a better word. If this is of interest to you, this is how we operate. This is our model. We are a membership-based organisation, and you can either sit back and relax and I'll do it for you, or option 2, do it yourself. Because I've given you enough information to be able to go out there and find a block, build a rooming house. You can do that. I'm okay with that. But if you want me to do it, then I'll do that for the next 2 years for you. And at the moment, my record is 5 in the first 6 months for one client. He wants 10 at the end of a year and a half. So he's getting value out of that because he's got me working pretty busy to create that outcome. Next slide. Is your choice as to which way we go. A lot's involved. I think you're aware of that. Next slide. There's an urgent need. Nigel's one of my clients in Newcastle. He's currently running at $1 million a year. He's hit that number 10 mark. We've got lots of testimonials. What you're looking at there is a minister of religion, a factory worker. She works in a chicken factory. And the other guy on the right there was living with his sons and daughters because he was divorced at the age of 65. Nowhere to go. We found him a great room for accommodation. That's in Newcastle, different demographic there, smaller rooms. They're about 12 to 18 square meters, sometimes 20, so a bit different. Not our demographic. We'll take the minister of religion, though. We're okay with that. How do we simplify it? 4 simple keys. What are they? What are those keys? Next slide. Is I personally do the whole thing. I'm involved. I'm out there today. I've done 6 film shoots of where your houses are at, looked at some blocks. We've come up with some winners, and we put them together and we make them happen. We have full access to me as a coach, 10 times a year. Over 2 years is 20 of those, plus our boot camps and other things. Next slide. Covers the third thing that we do, which is education. A lot of that happens because we like to bring you up to speed. It comes back to the fact that you do have a duty of care to be smarter than me eventually in terms of what we do. That's my job. And as you get smarter, my goal is to get smarter again so you can play with me again. If I don't, you won't. So it's a constant game of catch up. And we do a lot of research in what we do. Fourth one is we introduce you to our dream teams. They become part of your teams. Town planners, engineers, all of our teams, our building teams, they're all unique to us. They all work exclusively with us. And collectively, we do subdivisions. We've got 27 subdivisions on the go at the moment for our clients, a whole bunch of other things to make your job easier. Next slide. Covers us to our last few minutes, so we'll have you finishing very shortly. So introducing our club. Our club is pretty simple. We do done-for-you deals, which we put the deals together for you in one contract or 2-part contract, depending on how we're trying to do it. Land, we source the experienced builders, the project management, and we work with your property managers. Next slide shows you that we, from there, leverage our team that I've mentioned, our town planners, our project managers, our NDIS providers, if that's the area you're going into. We avoid the headaches and hassles. We have significant cost savings. We charge less than a real estate agent to put the whole thing together from start to finish. So we work on scale. And we get our builder down to a price where the fees charged actually are the same as if you deal with the builder direct. It's still the same cost because we're offering him 100 contracts negotiated at a lower price. Our job is that we have to perform and give him 100 contracts. Otherwise, we've just blown the whole thing up. So it's very hard at our end because we have to perform at 8 per month minimum. We reduce our time. Our builders are running at a 26 build time from the time the slab is laid, and we can grow your passive income faster. So what are our inclusions in what we do? They are quite simply a number of things. Let's have a look at what they are. It's a 2-year membership. but it doesn't start until a boot camp kicks in. So members that came in January have not started their run until December, when our first boot camp is showing December 2, 3, 4. We do a complete portfolio review and a strategy session with you. We continue on to then go into the next step. Exclusive access to our done-for-you deals. We guarantee that we will give you 10 opportunities in 2 years. At the moment, we're running at 10 opportunities every month. So we are certainly meeting our target of number of deals. We give you bulk buy discount access. We get a lot of furniture. We can do all sorts of things that way. Next. We'll go quicker for these, Paul. Direct coaching access. The next one is access to our micro events. Every time we finish a house, we do an open, so you can pop in if you've missed the last one. Discounts to our live events. If you're a member, that discount drops to 0. External, you'll pay, but that's where it's at. Next one. Ongoing education, access to our A-team, sourcing of land, builder selection, great relationships, fixed price contract, underlined tick, no changes to the variation in the contract. Property design to get the best use of the block, marketer fee savings. Marketers on rooming houses charge $60,000. We're running at about $17,000. So we're nowhere near the mark. A real estate agent sitting somewhere around $30,000. Based on him selling a rooming house for $1 million, that's the commission payable. So we're running at about half of where an agent's sitting, maybe a bit more. Property management selection, 21-hour webinars. You can bring a partner at no cost to the whole program. Cost only price to our one-day self-drive tour, and 2 tickets to our boot camps that come up once to twice a year. Our next slide simply shows what we don't do. We are not a buyer's agent. Do not ask me to find something and pay me as an agent. It'll cost you 3 times as much. We're not a marketer. We are not in any way a fee for hourly consultations. Once you're in, you're in. And so it's a known outcome. There's no do it yourself. I do it for you. All the numbers are known because we've got enough projects on the way. And, if you're not sure, I'll meet you in the car. We'll show you some stuff. We're not getting it wrong until we get it right. We've got enough energy behind this in 10 years to know where it's going and what's going. There's no risks around feasibility, problems of development, cost overruns that are on any new house and land projects. We don't have those because we know our models and we know our build times, and those are the 2 key points. Next slide. Is simply that, I'm sorry, this is someone saying something nice. Justin is a dentist, so he can't show his face. But he's doing a subdivision with me. He's building 2 that way, subdividing 2 blocks into 2 rooming houses in Zilmere. And he's got another one in Mitchelton that we've got under construction at the moment. So he's saying nice things about me because he wants another 2. And so he's a great guy. And we're very happy to have people we like. And modern dentistry is important to have. So basically, if you don't get offered a minimum of 10 properties to invest in at that magical 8% or higher within your 24 months of membership, you get a refund. Next slide. Basically, we're saying if you want a 30-minute strategy session with our team members, during this call, you'll find out what rooming houses is all about. We're as more concerned about whether you're a fit for us as we're a fit for you. And in that 30 minutes, we'll figure out ways to say why you shouldn't do this or why you should. It's really that simple. There's no point doing something unless you're ready to do it, because you've only got 2 years with us. And if you're not finance ready, if you're not capable of doing it, you don't want to do it, well, then it's not the right fit. But we'll give you all the information to be able to make that decision. You'll understand what it takes to make you ready for a rooming house. We'll have your questions answered and more. So if you want to do anything, just email my PA of 28 years, Linda, at the High Yield Property Club. Why do we limit our numbers? Because of land supply. If suddenly I get 50 people join, I simply can't do that because I don't have the land. And so we've got to perform at the rate of what we can perform at. And we're also limited to 100 properties a year. So we cap it for that reason. Some people take a year to get ready. Some people take a day to get ready. So it's up to, we balance it out that way. So that's about it for what we are, for what we do. I'm not sure there's another slide on that, but I don't think so. Let's have a look. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's a done-for-you deal. It's an implementation strategy to get the job done. It's all about if it's not 8% minimum, we don't do it. Only apply if you're confident that you meet the finance criteria and that you're ready to take action in the next 3 to 6 months. If you're not, well, then wait until you are. We're there. We're not going anywhere. We're going upward and onward. Be mindful. Councils can change the rules, cancel the rules, do anything they can and will. But for now, it's a winner, and we're constantly coming up with new products to keep the machine running. So for all of you conscious investors out there, thanks for listening to what we had to say tonight. Paul, thanks for putting up with me. I apologise to your members if I've said anything that would be politically incorrect. It would be so unlike me to do that. Sure. And it's been great catching up with you guys. So if you've got no questions, it'll be good night from me and good night to you. So over to you, Paul.
That's great, Kevin. Very informative. Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions there. I'm just going to have a look in the chat really quickly. Just stand by. If anyone else has any other questions in the chat, if you can put them in. Natasha's got a question there for you, Kevin. Is there a limit to the number of people that are permitted to live in the homes? For example, could there be 5 couples living? So 5 couples. So a couple in each room, or is it limited to singles?
To answer your question is if the people, Natasha, that live there are your children and you are the parents, then yes, you could have 10 people in there. You could have 20 people in there, because if they're bloodline, then there's no limit to the number of people that can live in your principal place of residence or residence that you create. But in investment under the Rooming House Accommodation Act, we're bred mainly by the fire rules and the rules of council, which are 5 unrelated parties, 5 people only. So if you had someone staying the night, we'd be in breach of that and they would be evicted for staying overnight. So 5 only. And they're governed under the Rooming House Accommodation Act, which means that if they breach the rules, they are evicted within 24 hours. We're not restricted the same as you are with a Residential Tenancies Authority. So 5 only, individual, non-related, and no more. That's it, 5, only 5.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. Can I also ask a question as well that I normally sort of get from clients for Conscious Investor Network in relation to eligibility as far as their self-managed super funds are concerned? Their capability in relation to purchase. And I acknowledge that you're not a super person, but from your experience with clients you've dealt with previously in relation to, perhaps finance for their self-managed super funds, if they're purchasing in that structure, et cetera. Can you speak into that?
I can. The problem we've got, Paul, is we can't sell to a self-managed super fund a 2-part contract, which means we can't sell to a super fund a block of land and then say to them, now please pay us for the slab frame roof completion. So the only way we could do that is go to another self-managed super fund and say, hey, would you like 10% return on your money? And you can lend it to Natasha. Natasha will then sign an unconditional contract and pay for that house at the end as a 1-part contract. You, John, will make 10% on your money in that year. So it's $100,000 more for Natasha to build it in her self-managed super fund, but she's had to put no money down and not pay until it's ready for tenancy. So she's getting cash flow in a super fund as soon as it's handed over that way, but she's paying $100,000 more to do it using a self-managed super fund. So I need to get somebody else who wants to make 10% on their super fund to back Natasha, who signs an unconditional contract. Does that explain that?
It does. Thank you.
Good.
So I don't seem to have any other questions coming through. So we've given the access. I'll post the link in the video description for the people who are watching the replay or the people that are here in the live webinar at the moment as well. Anything else that you want to leave us in closing before we sign out?
Yeah, get smarter. Just think about what structure you put things in. The Magna Carta's not there to protect you anymore. It doesn't exist, guys. If you don't think about this, if you don't do it properly, if you don't get guidance from people that have been around the block more than once in terms of being cornered on these things, then if you get the structure wrong, everything I've said is probably redundant, because it's not about the money, it's about the money. And everything councils and governments are there to do is figure out how they can keep getting more money. So we built a rooming house under 1 title, 5 tenants, to avoid paying ridiculous infrastructure charges and all the other things. But please be mindful of the structure you buy it in, because that is a big part of this whole process. So on that alone, that's why I was so happy to be here for Paul tonight, because I really resonate with everything that Paul's doing in regards to this whole conscious investor thing, which is a very non-explaining company, but I do know on a deeper level what it really means, which is how you can protect your assets longer term and avoid all these resets that everyone's trying to put on us is the key to this. So it's my answer to that one, Paul.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for your time this evening. Kevin, thank you for everyone that's here watching or listening to this recording. Kevin, thank you for what you're doing in relation to, I acknowledge your contribution to, housing affordability crisis that we're experiencing at the moment and being part of the conversation for the solutions. So thank you for what you're doing for our community.
No problem at all, Paul. And thank you for what you're doing for our community too. And it's 2 words, common unity.
That's it. Absolutely. Okay. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks again, Kevin.
Good night,
much love to everyone. Thank you.